how all this translates into the book and into, you know, comics form in general. I'm going to take a sip of water here because I'm getting a little dry. I always thought that there would be 3 levels of history I could deal with in the book. The first, of course, and you know, most importantly, and what I most wanted to get across in the book, was a personal level of history. I knew that because the book was going to focus on my grandfather's story and Jack's, that there could be scenes in my book that don't appear in any other war story, okay, because it is specific to their experience. Such as, remember the diary entry I showed you back at the beginning of the woman who'd been hit by the double-decker bus? Okay? So we've got details that just come right out of the diary. They're coming out of a movie. Bob Hope and Betty Hutton, and let's face it, right? We know that's what they saw at the movies. So I've been able to be that specific about it. Obviously, I've had to create some dialogue. I don't really know what they talked about on their walk, but I can kind of guess because I got to know both men pretty well. And then, you know, the scene with the bus, which is it's not something you're going to see in Saving Private Ryan or, you know, like I say, any other war story. It's specific to their experience. The second level of history I was able to deal with was local history. And I know we're a long way from Southern Ontario right now, but where my grandfather lived and where I grew up nearby in Port Stanley, Ontario, which is right there on Lake Erie, there's, or it was anyway, this gigantic old dance hall in the 1930s. It was called the Pavilion then, and eventually was renamed the Stork Club. But my grandparents danced there in the 30s to, you know, some of the major bands at the time would all play there. Your Glenn Miller, your Benny Goodman, your Duke Ellington, all those kind of bands. My parents even danced there in the 50s to, you know, to people like Elvis and stuff like that. The club burned down in the late 70s when I was just a little guy, so I didn't get to dance there to anybody. I got kind of robbed. But yeah, it's a big part of local history where I'm from. People would recognize this this dance hall. Also on the subject of local history, I mean, it means nothing to 99.9% of the people who read the book, but this is the scene from the end where my grandfather comes home from the war. This first shot of the house, is a sort of a well-known farmhouse. It was actually my great-grandfather's farmhouse, okay, where my grandmother grew up. And she lived there with her father while my grandfather was overseas. So that's the house he would have returned to her when he came home. So, like I said, it means nothing to most people, but, when someone in my family reads the book, they say, hey, there's the old farmhouse, So it's kind of cool to be able to have those little things in there that mean different things to different people. The third level of history I was able to deal with was, of course, world history, okay? Because there are some times when my grandfather and Jack's story intersects with major events of the 20th century, such as D-Day, right? So this is a big 2-page spread, it covers 2 whole pages in the middle of the book, sort of depicting the Canadian, or the Highland Light Infantry of Canada landing at Juno Beach. And thanks to old photographs and descriptions in the war diary and stuff, I was able to reconstruct that pretty accurately. So this is a page I like to show because it's probably my favorite page in the book, and a lot of the things I wanted to do with the book are sort of well illustrated by this page. And a lot of people say to me, not younger people mostly who kind of get it, but some older people who still don't kind of get the whole comics thing are sort of like, why comics for this material? Because they still largely associate it with superheroes and kid stuff, and they they wonder why something so serious in this form. And something that comics do really well, despite their reputation for being about guys in colorful costumes knocking over buildings on each other, something comics do really well is quiet, okay? Is silence. And something that is, kind of a hallmark of my work in particular is to just kind of let a moment breathe, You know, just kind of to take a single moment and extrapolate it from several different points of view and just let the reader, you know, just kind of be there for a while. This scene here kind of was described to me by Colonel Barry, who I talked about earlier, describing the crossing of the English Channel on the morning of D-Day. He's described how they're in the landing crafts, and it was a rough day on the channel. Okay, there had been a storm, and the water was still pretty choppy. Okay, so everyone knows what it's like to be on a boat when the water's rough, right? The stomach gets going, right? Secondly, they're crammed in there like sardines, right? They're just packed in there. He described to me how there's no room for anybody's legs, okay? The air is also full of smoke. It's the 1940s, and everybody smoked back then because they didn't realize it was bad for you, you know? So, you know, everyone's just puffing away. And of course, they're nervous, which makes them want to smoke even more. You've got all the smells of the other men because they were packed in there overnight. So, I mean, you know, I've got one guy throwing up here. Imagine being the guy who's got to sit beside this guy for the rest of the trip. And, you know, people are going to the bathroom in the corner. Everyone's, you know, covered in their thick, heavy uniform and gear, so they're sweating. You know, you've got all the smells of the other men. He also described the smell of the diesel fumes on the boat and how that was making people even sicker. On top of all of that, of course, is the fear, right? They know as soon as they get off this boat, they might be killed the minute they step off the boat. They know they're going into some just horrible, heavy, heavy combat. So, you know, just try to imagine it. And how do you describe it? I mean, you know, like I've tried to just describe it in words, but it's difficult. But in a visual medium like comics, you can kind of just put, and there's no words on this page, but you just, you know, try to kind of put the reader there, even if it's just for a page. Another thing about this page that I like to kind of talk about is actually not just this page, but the whole book is done in this 9-panel grid. It's every page is 3 by 3. There's some variation to it, but you know, most pages are 3 rows of 3, and all the panels are the exact same size. This is maybe getting a little technical, but it creates a rhythm, right? It creates a very strict rhythm, almost a military rhythm, which is appropriate for this material. But more importantly, again, getting a little technical here, but the more you divide the page up, in comics the panels represent time. So the more you divide the page up into smaller bits, the more you're creating smaller little increments of time. And I really wanted the book to be about the small moments. You know, despite the big double-page D-Day thing I just showed you, I wanted most of the book to be about the waiting they went through, the fear, not just the combat, but the entirety of the experience of sort of waiting for that stuff to happen. So I wanted it to be about these little, tiny, small moments that by the end of the book would hopefully add up to something powerful in the reader's minds. So there are, you know, again, trying to get at the whole of the experience. There are some lighter moments in the book, like, you know, I've got some golf in there. I couldn't very well write a book about my grandfather without putting some golf in it. But by contrast, and there's not a lot of combat in the book, but the last 10 pages or so get a little dicey. And when those parts did happen, I tried to be as frank as I could about what it must have been like. It's tough with my style because, you know, I came up as a magazine illustrator and doing advertising illustration, so I developed this drawing style that's kind of cute and appealing and likable, which was a bit of a hindrance when I had to draw, you know, the horrors of war. But this is another instance where the 9-panel grid kind of saved me, because I figured, well, instead of, you know, just doing these huge things with a bunch of cartoon characters killing each other, I could show just quick little snippets of horrible things. And these panels aren't even very connected. You know, there's not a lot of continuity between them. We're just cutting from one horrible thing to another horrible thing to another horrible thing. But that must be what it's like when you're fighting in a trench. I mean, everywhere you would look, there'd be some other, you know, absurdly violent thing going on, and it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to you. So I tried to make the combat scenes really disorienting like that. And I think, like I said, I think that kind of saved me a bit, being able to do it that way. So just to wrap up, the book does have a website, twogenerals.com, with a hyphen in the middle. If any of this has been interesting to you, old photos and historical research and that kind of stuff, I'm going through the whole book on this website, scene by scene, detailing all the research that went into reconstructing whatever happened in that scene. So lots more old photos, diary entries, letters. Like I say, if this was interesting, there's a lot more of it on the website, so you can check that out if you want.